It's Tuesday, May 16th, 2023, and it's patch day for Marvel Snap. Well, we don't know what balance changes are going to be coming to the client just yet. Stay tuned for another video on that later today when they finally drop. We do know that Kitty Pryde is going to be re-released back into the wild today with a slightly updated text box. We'll talk about that in a moment. And everyone that doesn't currently have Kitty Pryde in their collection will be getting a copy of her for free. So today, in addition to talking about Kitty Pryde's changes, we're also going to run through my top 5 deck lists that I'm looking forward to trying with Kitty Pryde on stream later today. Kitty Pryde is still going to be a 1 energy base 0 power card, but her text box is changing in some very important ways. Previously, you could optionally return Kitty to your hand once over the course of a turn. She would get +2 power, and then you have the option to play her back out immediately on that same turn if you chose to. Now, Kitty Pryde is going to automatically try to come back to your hand at the very start of your turn, and she gets +2 power whenever she's returned to your hand for any reason. While this is worse in some situations, it is better in others. Most notably, when Kitty Pryde is bounced by a card like Beast or Falcon, she will get larger now, whereas previously, if she wasn't returning herself to your hand, she didn't get to grow up. The second thing has to do with timing windows, though, with her returning at the start of your turn. The first thing to note is that her coming back to your hand is going to happen before you draw a card for the turn, meaning if you have 6 cards in your hand and Kitty Pryde is in play at the start of your turn, she's going to bounce back up to your hand and you're not going to get to draw that turn. Also, notably, as it works with other cards being added to your hand when your hand is full, if at the start of your turn you already have 7 cards, Kitty Pryde is not going to be able to bounce back to your hand that turn, and you're going to miss the window to get her +2 power unless you have something like Beast or Falcon to pick her back up with after the fact. Another important thing to note about the timing window on Kitty coming back to our hand is that the secondary developers have confirmed that Kitty Pryde coming back to your hand is going to happen before priority gets calculated. I think this is actually a pretty big buff for Kitty Pryde as a card, because Kitty Pryde removing her power from the table before priority gets calculated makes it more likely that your opponent is going to have priority for the turn, and this is typically a good thing for a Kitty Pryde deck, because if you're going second and Kitty Pryde is going to be coming back to your hand at the start of your next turn, the following turn, it means the timing windows for your opponent to remove your Kitty Pryde with either a Killmonger or something like Shang-Chi when she's larger are really strict and going to be quite difficult for them to do. As someone who's played a lot of these bounce decks, explicitly not having priority is often a goal you need to play towards, and Kitty Pryde's new design is going to make it easier than ever to make that be the outcome that you have. Now, this Kitty Pryde change is not all upside. It has pretty big drawbacks in situations where your hand is full or you have multiple Kitty Prydes in play through something like, say, Bar Sinister or Sinister London. Under Kitty Pryde's previous design, even if you only had 1 space open in your hand, you could pull back and replay multiple Kitty Prydes over the course of the turn, powering them all up and re-triggering things on the board. However, if you start the turn with multiple kitties in play, you're only going to be able to bring back a number of Prydes equal to the amount of space you have open in your hand, up to that maximum hand size of 7, which gives you a little bit less flexibility in these edge cases that her design previously offered. All of that being said, I think Kitty Pryde's still going to be a pretty powerful 1 energy play in Marvel Snap. Not only is she going to offer you the ability to spend a potentially unused resource every single turn, acting as a pseudo sunspot that turns 1 resource into 2 power as opposed to just 1, but Nebula is a pretty common card being in this month's season pass, one of the premier other 1-drops in the format, and Kitty Pryde being able to be played out, bounced back, and played out again every single turn is going to give you a natural counter to this common other powerful 1-drop. I'm actually really looking forward to this dynamic being added to the game. I think with Kitty Pryde coming back, Nebula existing, and Sunspot being toned down 1 power to a good spot, we finally have a good range of different 1-drops where different decks will be choosing which one they want to play in different edge cases, and will no longer have the case where there's simply this go-to, you play Sunspot, it's the best 1-drop that we lived in for a long time in Snap. The first of the Kitty Pryde decks that I'm most looking forward to giving a try is the Beast Falcon Bounce Shell. The big thing Kitty really does for this core that it didn't have before is gives us a 5th powerful one energy play that adds a good bit of consistency to the deck, I would expect. This deck is one that really wants to be playing cards tightly on curve over the first few turns of the game. So the games where you have a one energy play versus the games that you don't tend to be night and day, fairly different. You'll note that this is one of the first iterations of this archetype where I finally dropped America Chavez. There are two reasons for that. The first is because Kitty Pryde comes back to our hand every single turn. We're basically never going to play Chavez on turn 6 in a game where Kitty Pryde is going. The second is because of that first thing that I mentioned, Kitty Pryde being an additional 1-drop means that the added consistency that Chavez was adding to our early game draws becomes less important because Kitty Pryde is just another 1-drop that we can be playing out early. The rest of this deck is some payoffs as well as the cards that bounce our 1-drops back and forth. We have Angela, Collector, and Bishop that all scale up as things bounce in and out of the battlefield. We have Hitmonkey as a payoff that we can draw off the top to play out in a big flourish on the final turn of the game. And we have Mysterio as a card that works well with Angela, Bishop, and Hitmonkey, as well as powers up really large with Bast. I think figuring out exactly which details work well in this deck is definitely going to take some work. I think there's probably iterations where we want to try Kitty Pryde with the Darkhawk package like I played in this Bound Shell in the past as well. But I think this build with Collector especially is definitely where I am most looking forward to start with the Bound Shell with Kitty Pryde's reintroduction into the game. I think the number one thing to consider when trying to work Kitty Pryde into your various decks is that ideal Kitty Pryde decks probably involve a number of 4 and 5 energy plays as the top end of your curve, because playing these out in the final moments of the game mean you have that extra energy laying around to allow Kitty to play herself back out to the board again and again and again, continuing to grow large. Enter this Kitty Hawk Destroy build that we have here. Not only does it get to leverage Angela with things like Mysterio and Hood that can be cleared out later by Killmonger, but that also tops out at things like Shang-Chi and Darkhawk that give us natural room to fit Kitty Pryde into those later turns of our curve. Speaking of Killmonger, I think one of the real upsides Kitty Pryde has over other powerful 1-drops like Nebula and Sunspot is that because Kitty Pryde is returning herself to our hand every single turn, she's a powerful 1-drop that we get to play in tandem with our own Killmonger, because we can always sequence Kitty Pryde out after Killmonger on the turns where we're going to be clearing out all the other 1-drops on the board. Oh, and before anybody asks, Darkhawk is finally downgrading to Series 3 with the patch today, so shut up, you can't replace it, pick it up as your free card for the month. He's great, play him. Our next take on Kitty Pryde here isn't quite all in on the bounce plan, choosing to only play Beast but not Falcon, but we're looking to leverage Moon Girl as not only another means of making our collector larger when she doubles up our hand size, but she can also double up our copies of Demon from the Hood or our copy of Kitty Pryde, making it so we can start playing out multiple copies per turn that are going to be scaling up larger and larger. As far as this core goes, one question that's going to need to be answered through playtesting is, does this shell with all lower powered things, meaning we get to leverage Bast, end up being ideal? Or is the She-Hulk shell that we've seen going around Marvel Snap for the last few months a better place to explore Kitty Pryde when looking to duplicate it with Moon Girl? I'd love to hear your thoughts on which of these two you think would be better in the comments down below. For our last couple of Kitty Pryde decks today, we're going to have an overlap of 5 core cards that I think can go in a variety of different Kitty Pryde shells, just because they're pretty generically powerful and flexible, and they all have interchangeable pieces that work well together. Angela is kind of the core of this group of 5 cards, getting +2 power every time a card is played to her path. Kitty Pryde has obvious natural synergy with Angela, bouncing in and out every turn. In addition to Kitty Pryde working with Angela, though, we have Nightcrawler as well as Jeff, who can deploy to the Angela path, make her larger, and then move to another spot on the board where we might need their stats. And then finally, this 5-card package gets wrapped up with a bow on top featuring Miles Morales, since Miles gets cheaper if a card moved on the previous turn, so the Nightcrawler and the Jeff that work well with the Angela end up making Miles cheaper as well for an efficient and powerful play. The 7 other cards that we fill in the details around this 5-card package with, I think, can vary pretty greatly, and are going to take a lot of testing to try and figure out what's optimal. This particular build I'm calling Kitty Clutter because we're looking to leverage Viper as well as Green Goblin and Titania as ways to send things across to our opponent's side of the board and really gum up the works. This build likely has a lot of good counterplay to things like Galactus, can be quite obnoxious to lose to, so I think it has a lot of potential if you're someone like me who hates losing that particular matchup. Our final Kitty Pride deck today that I'm looking forward to trying is again using this core of 5 cards I talked about a moment ago with Kitty Pryde, Nightcrawler, Jeff, Angela, and Miles Morales. The 7 card details around them this particular time is looking to play a more controlling game. We've got Spider-Man along with Daredevil to lock our opponents out on the final turn of the game, and we've got Shang-Chi as well as Enchantress as tech cards to answer whatever our opponent might be answering. The big thing that stands out in my mind as having a lot of potential with this particular build is that Shang-Chi and Enchantress in particular allow us to deploy Kitty Pryde along with Titania on turn 6, so not only be disrupting our opponent but also putting a lot of stats into play. And Gamora is a 5-drop that only works well on turn 5 in tandem with Daredevil, but Gamora is also a fantastic part of a build our own 6-drop where we spend 5 energy to play Gamora out for a big swing in one path, and then we deploy Kitty Pryde for the final time or a Titania that we've drawn in order to put stats somewhere else in a very efficient manner. All in all, I'm really looking forward to brewing with Kitty Pryde. I was really sad when they had to disable her because of the game-breaking bugs that was causing people to get locked out of the game. I think she's one of the more interesting cards to release in Marvel Snap, even with her text box update. Just very flexible, potent card that's going to fit into a lot of decks and curves. I would love to know in the comments down below where you plan to start brewing with Kitty. I think there's going to be a lot of fantastic things to try out. If you want to see some of the brews that I listed today in action for the first time, make sure you head on over to twitch.tv/Jeff Hoagland, where I will be live streaming the testing of all of these decks as soon as the patches go live. As always, thanks for watching, and be sure to check back in again today later when we get to do a full review of whatever balance changes Second Dinner has in store for us in today's patch.